Hey guys, in this video today we're going to take a look at how we can take a Flogo Enterprise 2.5 project and deploy it onto Fargate. And alongside that, we'll be using AWS Parameter Store in order to manage the environment variables that we have set within this project itself. So to start off, we'll need a Flogo Enterprise project. In this case, I've done something very simple where I just have an HTTP trigger where I'm going to input some value for ID. And that is going to go through these branch conditions and say, if I set the ID value to 1, log this message. If I set the ID value to 2, log this message. And in this case, the log messages will be what the environment variables are for sample and or test. So if I look here for app properties, this is where my environment variables are. In this case, I define the default value for sample to sample value, and the default value for test to test value. So in this example, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to deploy this onto Fargate. What's going to happen is that I'm going to use AWS Parameter Store to actually change the value of this test variable so that when I query it, instead of it saying test value, it's going to say whatever I've defined within my Parameter Store. So I've already actually built this application out and I've containerized it and such like that. So if you want to see more info on how to do that, feel free to check out some of the other videos in the playlist. We actually walk through that in a little bit more detail. Just keep the length of this video a little bit shorter. I'm not going to actually walk through all that right now. So to start off, you want to go to AWS console, and I'm going to show you on ECR that I already have the actual application image stored within my ECR repository. So here you see the instances or the images right here. So then if I go to ECS, I actually have a cluster running. And in this case, this is a cluster where I'm using Fargate, so I don't have to have any type of CPU utilization or memory utilization, anything like that, because I don't have any pack and EC2 instances for this cluster. So in order to deploy onto ECS or Fargate, you have to have a test definition. So in this case, I've already created a test definition, and let me just walk through how that looks like. So what you want to do is give your test definition a name, and you're going to want to give your test definition a role. And so this is very important when you're deploying your project onto Fargate if you want to use AWS Parameter Store. So if the application in Flogo that you're deploying does not use or does not have to basically talk to any other AWS services, then you can leave the task role as blank. But if it does, you need to actually define what type of services it's allowed to talk to, and that's done with the task role. And so if I open up the IAM console, you'll see in the task role itself, I have a policy that defines access to the get parameter by path and get parameters by the SSM. Basically, this is the Parameter Store service. So without this, I would actually get an error thrown when I actually try to run and basically call upon these apps. Something to keep in mind is that for the trust relationships, you need to make sure that you have ECS tasks defined as identity provider. So something to keep in mind. Networking mode will always be AWS VPC when you use Fargate. It's something to keep in mind. And then task execution role, this is fully defined by default as some value. It'll create one for you. You can use a different one. Basically, this allows access to pool container images and actually store logs onto CloudWatch for you. Define the task memory size. This can be changed depending on what your application is. In this case, I've defined it to something very small. So task memory 512, task CPU 256. And then for the container definition, so this is where you have to just make sure that you have this correctly, is you need to define what the image is. In this case, this is what your ECR, URL or basically where it's stored. Define some sort of soft memory limit. Define what the port is. So in this case, the application, if I go back here on the actual trigger itself, I'll be trying to access it on 9233. So I need to find basically and open up that, port mapping. And then the environment variables. This is very important. So if you already seen in the playlist, there's a video on how to use AWS Key Parameter Store within AWS VPC. You'll notice that we do use this Flogo app props AWS on there as well. So if you want to see that more in detail, watch that video as well. What you need to do is define what this environment variable is within these different parameters. So in this case, use IAM role true. So this always has to be there. Region, you should define what the region of your Parameter Store variables are stored in. And then the param prefix, and this is env param. And let me just open up the Parameter Store. So system manager, Parameter Store. So you notice I am in North Virginia, so that's US East 1. And the actual parameter is env param test. So the way that this is defined is that the param prefix is basically the prefix before the actual variable name. So in this case, env param, and the actual variable or the value itself is within test. And in this case, if I go, what test is, well, the value is test value from Parameter Store. So what should happen is if it picks this up correctly, it should actually change the value from test default, which is what we defined within the application itself, to test value from Parameter Store. And other than that, there's nothing else you really have to add. No, this is the only thing that's really key to make sure that you define what this environment variable is and that you actually define this correctly within here. So once you've created your task definition, you're going to want to go to your ECS cluster, and you can click on the cluster itself, and you're going to want to create a service. So hit create, select the launch type to Fargate, define what your task definition is, give it a name, give it whatever you want, number of tasks, 1, and keep the deployment type to a rolling update. Define what the cluster VPC is. In this case, I'm going to use my default VPC, and I'm just going to define 2 subnets just for the sake of defining something more than just one. Because we're going to be accessing port 9233, we're going to need to change this this security group. So basically, I'm going to create a new one, but I'm going to change the type into custom TCP 9233. And for now, I'm just going to leave it as anywhere. We'll tighten that. We can tighten that up later on, or once we delete the stat, we don't have to worry about that. Hit save. Auto assign public IP because it's going to be external facing. No load balancer because we're just doing simple tests on Fargate, and we don't need service discovery or service integration or anything like that. Auto scaling, keeping it simple, so we're not going to add any of that, and we're going to create the service. So what will happen is that it'll create the security group so you can actually access the application that's running. The way that Fargate works is that it uses ENI, so basically it's a way that you can access publicly the different serverless backend functions that AWS uses in order to actually host whatever application you've deployed. And basically you'll be accessing the public IP address that's shown there in order to actually, be able to talk to your application or hit your application or curl it or something like that. So it takes like a minute or two to actually provision. So let's give it a few seconds, and we'll check it out once it's done. So let's refresh it now. You'll see that the last status is running, so the actual application itself is running. So under task, if we click on task, you'll see that it'll actually provide us with the network, public IP address is. So we'll copy that. 9233. It was env, and then we have to define what the ID value is. So because it was a simple app, we just defined what we had a branch for 1 and 2. So 1 would be what the sample value is. So this is what the default value is that we defined within the app properties. And then 2 should be what the test value is. And in this case, it's picked it up from the Parameter Store. So if you notice test value from Parameter Store, that's different from what we define default. And that's actually what shows up within the actual Parameter Store value here. So we were able to successfully deploy our application onto Fargate, and then we were actually able to attach and use AWS Parameter Store to define and to change what our app properties is within the application itself. Something really quick to show are the different logs, and if you notice that the logging is correctly here, so test value from Parameter Store, it's what we want to see, and then sample value is what the first one that we saw. So from a log perspective, we actually see that working correctly. So yeah, I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment below. And feel free to check out the other videos in the playlist. We go into a little more detail on a few other things that might be, pretty interesting and useful. Thank you.